So today we are going to go through the transition to the new refrigerants. All right, so we're going to navigate to the transition of these new refrigerants, which the new refrigerants we're going to be dealing with is mainly R454B and some R32. Most of what we're going to be dealing with is 454B because that's what most of the companies in this country have gone to. Mitsubishi is also going to R454B, where our GREE product is going to go to R32. Those are the two transitional or new refrigerants that we're going to be dealing with. So this morning we're going to go over what the A2L is, a little bit of the overview, some of the best practices as far as installation and service. And then once we get done with that, we're going to go over a little bit of product updates, some things that are going to be changing on the York and Luxair side. So why are we changing the refrigerant for our equipment? Well, back, for those of you that have done the EPA Section 608, this has been an amendment called the Kigali Amendment to that Montreal Protocol. And what this is, it's an international treaty that transitions to lower GWP or lower global warming potential refrigerants. If you remember back on your Section 608, that started when we went from CFCs and HCFCs, which were the refrigerants that contained chlorine, to get rid of our ozone depletion potential. Well, we've now discovered that the refrigerants we're using now have a high global warming potential. So we're working on getting that to where it is lower GWP refrigerants so that we can help with the global warming. So part of this is a phase down of HFCs, which R410A is the big one we're dealing with. So they're going to be phasing that down, not getting rid of it completely, but the production is going to be be lowering. So this whole amendment was ratified by over 90 countries, and it was ratified in the United States at the end of last year. There is, however, things that keep changing. You know, this is a government program, so they have the tendency to change things relatively quickly, but they actually did sign a temporary final agreement here just a couple days ago. So GWP is the global warming potential. Basically what it is it's the greenhouse gas effect. So a lower global warming potential number indicates a lower effect on that. So JCI, and like I said, Mitsubishi and a lot of the other manufacturers in this country have chosen R454B to be used as the replacement refrigerant. So R410A has a global warming potential of over 2088. R32 has a GWP of 675. R454B has a GWP of 467, and R1234YF has a GWP rating of 4. So what does all this mean? Well, it has been set at this time a GWP of 700 or less. That's why 410A is going away, because it is considerably higher. R32 is 675, so that is an approved GWP at this time. R454B is a combination of R32 and R1234YF. By adding in the 1234YF, that has lowered our GWP down to under 500. Now R1234YF, if you're not aware of it, you probably are dealing with it most every day, because that is the refrigerant that is in most of our automobiles. That's your air conditioning refrigerant being used. So at this time, 700 is our GWP limit. It is possible because there will be another round of changes starting in 2029. It's very possible that that GWP is going to be dropping to about 500 limit. So that's why most of the manufacturers have gone with 454B, because even if it lowers at that time, it's still going to be approved to be used because of the lower GWP. So what is an A2L? Well, an A2L is an HFO. Remember, we had CFCs, so example was R12, HCFC, which has hydrogen, chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. That was our R22. Then we went to R410A, which is an HFC. We got rid of the chlorine, so it's hydrogen, fluorine, and chlorine. And now we're dealing with HFOs, which also have hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon. What's different is the type of bond. There is a carbon-to-carbon double bond, or what is called an olefin bond. That's where we get the HFO. It's a hydrofluoroolefin. And this carbon-to-carbon double bond is a very weak bond, so it has a shorter atmospheric life. So even though it is the same compounds as our R410A, it's the structure of it with this bond in there that has made it weaker so that it doesn't last in the atmosphere so long. If you look at the chart on the right, R22, when it's released, it lasts in the atmosphere about 13.3 years. R410A lasts up to 30 years. R1234YF lasts about 11 days. So R454B lasts roughly 5 days in the atmosphere. R32 also lasts roughly 5 days in the atmosphere. So you can see the reason we're going from 410A of 30 years when it's released in the atmosphere to our new refrigerants, which are going to last a very short day, actually short time. So R454B is what's in the ash rate category of A2L. When it first started, we had A1s, A2s, A3s, B1s, B2s, B3s. Well, now they've added this category called A2L, means the A means it's non-toxic, 2 means it's flammable, but the L add in there means it is a low burning velocity. So it's not going to, while it's flammable, it's not highly flammable. So as we look at R410A is in safety group A1 with a GWP of 2088. That composition was actually part R32 in it, but it also had R125 in there. So R454B, because of the structure of it, it is an A2L, which means it is mildly flammable. And it once again consists of R32 and R1234YF. So if we look at flammability levels, R410A is low flammability. Doesn't mean it is not flammable under certain conditions. All refrigerants are flammable at some point, but it has no flame propagation. Our R454B is our A2L, which means it has a lower flammability level. An example of an A2 is R152A, which is a flammable refrigerant. And then our A3s, which are hydrocarbons, such as propane, isobutane, those are highly flammable. So as we look at our GWP getting lower, it generally means that our flammability level is going to start to go up. Oops, wrong way. So 454B, even though it's badly flammable, that is what is being chosen. And because it is mildly flammable, we do have some different things that we'll cover here. One thing about 454B and 410A is the pressures and our temperatures are very similar. So it's not going to be as huge a change when we went from R22 to 410A. where we dealt with a lot higher pressures, temperatures. These are very close to what we're dealing with R410A. So it's not going to be a drastic change as far as what we're used to dealing with. So some of these blended refrigerants, we have what's called temperature glide. Temperature glide is a term used to describe the range of boiling or condensing temperatures at a given pressure. So temperature glide can be anywhere from 2/10 of a degree up to 16. So if we look at the chart on the left, as our pressure goes up, our temperature goes up. And it's one line. If we look at the right, where we have a zeotropic or near azeotropic refrigerant, as they're called, we have what's called temperature glide. What that means is at a certain pressure, if it is boiling off, it boils at one temperature. If it's condensing, it will condense at a different temperature. So with 454B, we have a temperature glide, but once again, it is small. So we're not dealing with a huge amount of this temperature glide to deal with, but it does have a little bit more than 410A, which had a very low temperature glide. So with these near azeotropic refrigerants, they have two pressure columns listed on a pressure temperature chart. They have a dew point, which deals with vapor, and they have a bubble point, which deals with liquid when we use it to make our calculations. So the dew point, or the vapor, is used for calculating superheat. The bubble point, or liquid, is used for calculating our subcooling. But the temperature glide in 454B is roughly 1.8 degrees. So on some charts, you may only see one temperature. And what it does is it's looking at a dew point and a bubble point on the pressure temperature chart. And it is basically taking one or the other based upon if you're in the range, temperature and pressure range, that you'd be using it for superheat or if you'd be using it for subcooling. So 454B is only combustible in a relatively narrow range. The lower flammability limit and the upper flammability limit bracket is where this refrigerant can burn. It is a very slim range in there, but there is a range of where it can burn. So the ignition temperature to make this burn is going to be greater than 1472 degrees. So it isn't a case of where you're going to take out your Bic lighter and you're going to light this thing. You're not going to take out, a hair dryer or, worry about somebody drying their hair that it's going to blow this up or anything like that. You're going to have to work at it. So basically you would have to have a torch because you got to be over 1472 degrees for this to ignite. Even once it has been ignited, if you take the flame away, it cannot sustain a flame itself. So it will die out as soon as you take that away. So what we're going to try, if this works, is watch a little video here. See if it works here.
Hey, Steve, can you hear me? Steve, if you can hear me, we cannot hear you.
All right, can you hear me back again?
Yep, now we can.
Sorry about that.
We
Lost you
missed
when I
about the
tried to
last.
do the other video. So,
Oh yeah, we missed about the
all right,
last 3 or 4
so
minutes.
we will go back here a little bit. Hopefully where I missed, there we go, not too many. So back to what I was saying that you couldn't hear. If you look at the chart on the right, 454B and 410A, we're not dealing with great pressure temperature differences. A little bit, but not a huge amount. So we're generally going to be not much out of the realm of what we're dealing with, used to dealing with. R454B, the performance, we gain a little bit on efficiency and we lose a little bit in capacity. Not enough that is going to be a huge change, and all that is taken into account from the manufacturers themselves. One thing that we will see is because it has a less mass flow than 410A and a less liquid density, this will affect the equipment design, which once again, we won't have to deal with. That's already done. But we do have to look at our split system piping calculations where we're used to using a 0.62 or 0.67 or 0.6. The calculations are going to be a little bit less. So if we're going over our standard 15 feet for our line sets, we do have to add in. It's going to be a little bit less. It's still going to be close to 0.6, but it's going to be closer to, I think it's 0.57 ounces per foot. So not much of a difference, but if you're going a distance, you need to be aware of that it is a different piping calculation. But once again, we're not dealing with a huge change because our pressures and temperatures are very close to what they were. So some of the practices and tools may have changed to maintain the safety, but there's not a huge difference on a lot of the stuff that we're using. We can use the same gauge manifolds. Pressure is pressure, so it doesn't matter. However, if you use an electronic, you want to make sure you have something that shows R454B in there. Most of the ones that are out there have it, but if you have an older system that doesn't have it, then go get a hold of the manufacturer of the gauges and see if they can get you an update to it. As far as the analog gauges, once again, pressure is pressure. You can take and convert that pressure to a temperature. You just wouldn't be able to use the little dial, the little pressure temperature on the dial itself. You'd have to get a new gauge for that. But everything else, as far as our torque wrenches, flaring tools, pipe cutters, even our scales, the same thing you're dealing with now is what we're going to deal with the new refrigerant. Some of the things that will have to be a little bit different is anything electrical. As far as a vacuum pump, it's going to need to be A2L approved or A2L compatible. We are going to have to start carrying fire extinguishers. You're going to have to make sure you have a fire extinguisher with you. Gas leak detectors, electronic leak detectors, our recovery machines, those are all going to have to be A2L approved or A2L compliant. Our recovery cylinders will be different. We cannot use the existing recovery cylinders we have now because there are different requirements because it is a mildly flammable refrigerant. So as far as our tools, what makes it A2L compliant? Well, basically it uses a sparkless design, uses DC brushless motors, so we don't have brushes in there that can create sparks or anything like that. Soft contact power switches, all the electrical terminals are covered, so our switches and things, even though if they spark, that's not going to create a large spark, they still have to be enclosed so that no electrical connection can be in direct contact with the refrigerant. Our equipment's also going to have a fan to be included with you. So we do need to have a fire extinguisher. A CO2 dry powder Class B fire extinguisher has to be on the site with you. So every job or every van is going to have carry a fire extinguisher. Not that it's going to be or hopefully you ever have to use it, but will be required to have to carry this Class B fire extinguisher on every vehicle, so it is readily accessible. For leak checking, we have to make sure that we have our leak detectors that are capable of picking up A2Ls, which most electronic, you'll have to double check it, but you want to make sure it is A2L compliant, but a lot of them out there are already compliant. Even the soap bubbles, which isn't a big issue, but once again, we have to make sure everything is A2L compliant. As far as leak detectors, if those of you that have been around a long time, remember the old, what was called halide detectors, those use an open flame. Those are not a good thing to be using with R454B. So you might as well take those, and if you still have one, just throw it away. So you will have to use new leak detectors, make sure they're A2L compliant. Your vacuum pump needs to be A2L compliant. Once again, because of the design of it, has to be able to maintain a 500 micron vacuum on it. So you will need to double check your vacuum pumps. If they have much age to them, they're not going to be A2L compliant. You will need to update them at some time then. One thing that is going to be different is that all A2L cylinders will have an access valve with left-handed threads. So you will have to have this adapter to go on the tank so that you can use your gauges, your hose sets that you have now, that you'll be able to put them on with right-hand threads, but you will not be able to directly screw on to the valve on the tank itself without the adapter. The pressure relief valve. There is a pressure relief valve in all the cylinders. If you remember, now what we're dealing with now is if it overpressurizes, what happens is the disc blows out and you lose all of the refrigerant that would be in there. These are going to have an actual relief valve on them, so that if it overpressurizes, it will relieve the pressure but not drain the entire cylinder. When it gets below a certain rating, it will reset itself. And I had the question asked, well, what happens, if it gets overpressurized and I come back and I've lost part of my refrigerant in the tank? Well, it is an issue, but how many of you have ever had a 410A tank blow up in your van? I mean, there are temperature restrictions. You don't want to get it above 130 degrees, but it's, once again, we're dealing with the same pressures and temperatures. So if you never had a 410A can blow up, you're probably not going to have an issue with the 454B cylinders relieving pressure. The other thing that will be required is a red band or a red stripe. Anything that deals with an A2L refrigerant, the cylinders will be in red. They'll have a red stripe or a red band, or in case of a recovery cylinder, they will have a red top to it. So you will not be able to use your existing recovery cylinders with R410, oh, sorry, with R454B or R32. You have to use a recovery cylinder that is specifically for this with the red top on it. If it has a yellow top, can't do it for the new refrigerants. So your recovery equipment needs to be A2L compliant. Make sure that your recovery cylinder is DOT approved. Once again, it's going to have a red top on it. So I'm not going to go through all these best practices because these are what you should be doing now. What you should be doing now is the same things that you're going to be doing with the new refrigerant. Some of the things that were suggested are now going to be required for everything, but this is what you should be doing now. You know, it's a refrigerant, you're going to charge it in liquid form, so you're going to change it, the tank, turn it upside down, fill it up with liquid. As far as keeping records, the same thing you should be doing now. You should be keeping track of all the refrigerant that you're purchasing and where it's going to. Same thing as you were dealing with today. Do not vent it. Do not mix refrigerants. Do not overfill the cylinders. You know, a cylinder is full at 80% of its capacity. Same thing we're dealing with now. Don't overfill them. So once again, always read the installation manuals. Not that you have to read it every single time, but when you deal with a new product, and every once in a while, excuse me, you should make sure that you read the installation manual because things can change. Always make sure that you use your personal protective, your PPE equipment, hard hat if required, safety goggles, gloves. Make sure the gloves you're using are rated for, excuse me, rated for using with refrigerant or some sort of butyl line type of glove. Never use cotton gloves. If your refrigerant gets in the cotton, it will actually make it worse and burn your hand even worse than if you didn't have anything on it. So make sure you got either a good pair of leather gloves or ideally a pair of gloves that is refrigerant or temperature compatible, I should say. Make sure that you have all your voltages shut off. Unless you're working on it, make sure you have power killed to it. Make sure the area is well ventilated. Okay, make sure the RDS is in place, and we will talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. So the R2 RDS, this is the refrigerant detection system. This is what you will put on most installations. Now, it's not necessarily required on every installation, but it is required on most of the installations. And the equipment that we are going to get in, we will have it on all the equipment, just to make sure that we are covering liability reasons for one thing. If you comes to the where you don't have to use it, that is going to be your decision. You will have to determine that because it's going to be based upon how much refrigerant is in the system and how much area is the system covering. So any equipment that has 4 pounds of refrigerant or more has to have this RDS system. If it has less than 4 pounds, it is based upon the area, the smallest space that is serving the system. So the easiest thing is we're just going to have it put on every single piece of equipment we have, so we are covering that. So what the RDS system is a control board, and in the evaporator coil, you'll have a sensor. Now on the JCI coils, this sensor will already be pre-mounted. You do not need to move it. If you're going to horizontal position or downflow, it does not move. So it is pre-mounted in the coil, and it has a lead that will come outside and it will plug into this RDS control board. What the RDS control board function is that if that sensor picks up some refrigerant, what it will do is it will shut the system down as far as any heating call or any cooling call, and it will turn on the fan. It'll turn on the fan so that we're adding air to it to disperse it. The more air we add, the less flammable it becomes because we're diluting the concentration of the refrigerant. So this board will come mounted on the evaporator coil in a shipping position. That is not where it's going to be, because it's going to be in your way. So you will take that board off. You can mount it on the side of the furnace, on the side of the coil. Just be careful where you put it. You don't put long sheet metal screws through. Or you can mount it on a wall someplace between the evaporator coil and your furnace or air handler control board. Because what you will have is you will have your thermostat connections will come into this board. And then there will be a wiring harness that will come out of that board, which will hook up to your furnace. So that once again, if it detects anything, it will energize the blower and shut off your Y or your W call. So on installation, basically follow the same thing we're doing now. Still need a filter dryer, make sure it's approved. If it's a heat pump, it needs to be a bi-flow filter dryer. The filter dryers will come with the Yorker Luxair equipment, but it's not pre-installed. It will come with it, but you have to put the filter dryer in. The ideal place to put it is to put it in the house before the coil. So the best place to put a filter dryer, best place to put a filter is right before our metering device. That's the smallest spot in our entire system. So that is where we want to make sure we're getting anything that could be floating within the system, that we're filtering it before we get to that metering device. So we're going to put that in the system ahead of that. It will come with it, all the equipment except for the new HH8, which is the heat pump that we're going to be stocking. Hopefully we will catch it, but you will have to order in a filter dryer with the HH8 to be installed, because it does not come with that. Every other residential piece of equipment, that filter dryer will come with it. Locking caps are technically required, but in most areas they're not enforced. It's the same the same locking caps that we should be using now or have been using. Just depends on whether anybody is enforcing them or not. Now the filter dryers that come with this are just standard filter dryers as far as the connections. If you're using mechanical fittings, then we stock a different filter dryer that can be put in there that has extended connections, so you can use the mechanical fittings, the RLS pressed fittings onto that. These are standard. They're not long enough to be able to do that. Once again, our system, we're doing like we did before. We're going to purge the refrigerant the refrigerant circuit with nitrogen. We're going to pressure test it. we're going to pull a vacuum on it. We're going to pull it down to 500 microns, and before we go ahead and put our refrigerant in there. When we do our brazing, just like we always have been doing before, is we got to make sure that we're using nitrogen in the system so that we don't get any oxidation or any of the black crud inside, which can plug up our filter dryer, can plug up our metering device. So we want to make sure that we're doing just like we're doing now. Same thing, pressurize or put nitrogen in the system. Our recovery, once again, just what we're doing now. Make sure you're not a smoker when you're dealing with this. Make sure you do have a fire extinguisher available. Do not, just like any others, do not mix any refrigerants with air. And when the system is complete, purge it with nitrogen, and just what we're doing today. So this one here is basically just a ASHRAE chart. Basically what we're looking at is the high side pressure and the low side pressure. This is the pressures that we can pressurize with nitrogen for our leak checking our systems. If it's a Mitsubishi system, they want us to leak check that at 600 pounds of pressure. So we want to make sure we look at what the pressure is, and we want to pressurize it to the maximum we can to check for leaks. Then once again, we're going to pull a vacuum on it, pull it down to 500 microns, make sure it stays at 500 microns, and then we're good to go. Okay, so we're going to check all our brazed connections, any screwed on connections, use our leak check, whatever we need to do, make sure we don't have any leaks in it. Do not mix refrigerants. R454B system should be charged only with R454B refrigerant. Do not exceed the maximum allowable amount of refrigerant. So once again, you're going to have to look at your installation and tech guides. Make sure you're putting in the right amount of refrigerant, just like what we should be doing now. Charge the system. Once again, we're going to charge it in as liquid. So we're going to have to take and we're going to have to invert the can. Because it is a 400 series, all 400 series refrigerants are blends. So what we do is we charge them in liquid state to make sure that we have the right proper blended mixture going into the system. If we would charge it in as a vapor, we don't know which of the combination of refrigerant. Are we putting a little more R32 in? Are we putting a little more 124YF in? So we charge it in as liquid so we have the proper blend to go with it. Make sure we charge it up to the proper superheat and subcooling readings that are listed for that piece of equipment. Make sure electrical voltage is disconnected. Make sure the systems are grounded. It's always been important that all of our systems be grounded, but even more now, we want to make sure that everything is properly grounded. So when troubleshooting equipment, make sure if we're dealing with live equipment, make sure we're dealing with it carefully to make sure we don't have any sparks if we would have the chance of any refrigerant being around. So do not discharge capacitors, use only OEM parts when repairing the system. Here are some requirements for your storage of your A2Ls. If you're going to buy that amount of refrigerant, we're going to be more than happy to help you rack this up because we're going to be dealing with a large amount of refrigerant. But most of you aren't going to be stocking in multiple pallets, but if you are, we'll be more than happy to help you out with that situation. However, what you are going to be interested in is carrying around in your service van. Okay, this is considered the materials of trade, so you'd have to be carrying more than 440 pounds of refrigerant in your truck. So you don't need to placard it. No extra ventilation is required. However, when you're carrying the tanks, it is going to be a little bit different in that because we have that relief valve, if it would relieve, we need it to relieve the gas. Remember earlier I said the time it's most flammable is when we're changing from liquid to our gas. So if we're relieving liquid, it's going to evaporate, and at that point is when it is most flammable. So we want to make sure that that relief valve, when it relieves gas. So we're either going to store the tanks upright, or if you're using a racking system, like shown here, when we put it in there, we just want to make sure that that relief valve is at the top of the tank. So if for some reason it would relieve, once again, it's going to relieve the gas, not the liquid portion of it. So we just always have to make sure that that relief valve is at the top of the cylinder when we're calling it horizontally. So what we're dealing with, your best practices. You know, the main thing is for yours and everybody's safety. That's why we do things we do, is to protect yourself and anybody else, the homeowner to anybody else that's work can be around this. So observing best practices are also meant to provide safety to the building owners and to their property. It also helps to extend the life cycle of the equipment. Put it in properly, the equipment will last a long time without any problems. And it's also meant to make sure that we're getting the performance out of that equipment that it is designed for. So at this point, are there any questions? Once again, if you do, you can raise your hand, or I can unmute you, or if you would like, just type it in the chat box. I'll give you a couple minutes here. We're not done, but just give you a couple minutes if there's any questions. Still there? If not, we will continue on here then.
Hey, Steve, there's a question in there under the chat. Somebody just popped it in.
Okay, here's a question. For a retro, do we still flush the system with R11 and nitrogen? Yes. You still need to use the same practices like what we were doing before. If you're changing refrigerants and you're reusing the line set, you should flush it. Now, not necessarily that you have to use R11 every time. Flush it with the nitrogen, and if it's just basically a straight line shot, flush it with nitrogen, blow out as much oil as you can. However, if you're going to have a spot where you may have a low spot, then yes, you would want to flush that with R11 and follow it up with nitrogen. So the line sets can be reused as long as you flush them out. It's not as big an issue if when we went from 22 because we use mineral oil for our oil, where these 410A and our new refrigerants, they're all use a polyol oil. So it's not as drastic, but yes, we should still blow them out. Okay, the RDS system, will that be able to tie into an old existing furnace? Yes, it will. Any furnace that you're using a thermostat to control the furnace, this is going to go in between that. So that RDS control board is going to go on any system you have. It's just going to go in between the thermostat and between your furnace. So whether it be a York, a Luxair, an Amana, a Train, whatever, it's going to be good to go. All right, we'll continue on. If you have more questions, we've got plenty of time. Since my video didn't work, we will have plenty of time here for questions at the end. All right, so what we're looking at is some of the product updates. What's coming out with this new 454B and new furnaces. So we've got new equipment for Luxair and for York. What's going to be different is we're going to have a different nomenclature for our outdoor units. So for our outdoor units, if it is a York branded, it's going to start with a Y. The H, which is in our HH8 new heat pump, just means it's horizontal. The Luxair brand, Fraser Johnson, those are all going to start with an X. And if it's the Guardian, which is called the over-the-counter, that is going to start with an R, just like it does now. Our second one is going to be either a C or an H, whether it be a heat pump or an air conditioning, it's going to be determined that. Then we have our SEER 2 rating. The 3 is a 13.4, which is our minimum SEER 2 rating that's allowed. A 4, which is 14.3, which is the minimum if we were in the southern half of the country. And then we'll have a 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is. And when we get up to the V, which is going to be the variable speed type of equipment. So we're down to basically 3 letters and numbers as we start off on the system nomenclature for our outdoor units. So here's a chart, and I know it's really tough to read. It gives the entire list of what's on there. So our first is the brand, our product type, AC or heat pump, then our efficiency level, followed by our capacity, whether it be a 2-ton, 3-ton, 4-ton. Our refrigerant, which before we were dealing with 454B, it had an E in it, or sorry, had a B in it. It is now going to be E, which means it's 454B. Then we have our voltage rating, our control strategy, which is a standard, and then some other options and things like that. We also have different furnaces. We have some now, and we have some coming out in the future. So the nomenclature for those are also going to be changing. So on the 80%ers, we currently have the new 80% furnaces on hand. The 90% furnaces, we have the single stage furnaces on hand, the 2-stage furnaces, and the variables aren't out yet. The new 2-stage furnace should be coming out sometime after the first of the year. So the nomenclature is a little bit different in that if we look at the far right, the TM9E, which is the RGF19 in the Guardian side, we're going to have different nomenclature, whether it be a York or it be a Luxair. So if it's a York, it's going to start with a Y. If it's a Luxair, it's going to start with a Z. Then our second is going to be the efficiency. So a 90%er, we're going to have a 9. If it's an 80%er, the next letter is going to be an 8. So on the York side, the next number is a 1, which means it's a single stage. If it's a Y92, that means it is 2 stages. And then the E means it uses a standard ECM motor. That is the motor that is currently being used in the TM9Es and the TM9Ys. It is the constant torque motor. On the Luxair side, we're going to start off with the Z and then the 9, and then we're going to go with the E for our standard motor. And then S means it's single stage. In the case of the TM9Y, two stage, it'll be a Z9ET. The T means it is a two stage. When we go up to the TM9V, it'll be a Y92V, means it's a variable, the premium ECM motor with it. And on the Luxair side, it'd be a Z9VT, two stage with the higher efficiency variable capacity, or the premium ECM motor to go with it. So those will be changing. Some of them have changed, some of them have not yet, but everything will be changing within the next year. Another change that's going to be coming, and this is a running change. So I don't know when it's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point in time. They're changing the color. So the color is all going to be the same, whether it be a York or a Luxair, it's going to be the same color. And they will both be a different color. It will be what's called a modern mist, which is a grayish color, which the slide here doesn't give the true color what it's going to be, but it is a darker gray to it. So all the equipment will be that same color to it. What'll be different was going to be the badging on it and the models. Remember, the model numbers are going to be different, whether it's branded for Luxair or it's branded for York. The Guardian is going to go to a different color on the doors. So we don't have the green doors and the green box like we have. That will be changing to a lighter gray, which is called Evergreen Mist. So the Guardian type system will be a different color than the rest, but this is going to be a running change. So unfortunately, at some point in time, once again, I don't know when, but at some point in time, they're going to start putting out this new color. So unfortunately, we may have some mismatched colors when we're dealing with the furnace. And say we have a new furnace and an older coil, or a new coil with an older furnace. They may not be the same color. And unfortunately, it's a, once again, running change. So I don't know actually when that is going to happen, but sometime in the future, you're going to start to see this. Hopefully, as it gets closer, we'll get some more information as to when it will happen. But at this point, I don't know when it's going to happen, just at some point in time. So some things that are changing on the condensing units on the 454B is our filter dryers, well, on all our equipment, are going to go to what I would call a more standard filter dryer. We're getting rid of that little black ball. They're going to a standard filter dryer. The valves on them are going to be straight connections. They're going to be longer so that you can put on our RLS fittings. Our mechanical fittings will be able to be pressed directly onto the valves. If you want to braze them, you can either swedge the copper and braze it just like what we have now, or you can throw a coupling on there and braze it, but it will not have a swage on it other than the HH8 heat pump. They are, like I said, they are extended so that you can use the RLS fittings on it. But once again, the filter dryer that comes with it is going to be standard length. So if you're using the RLS fittings, once again, we do stock the filter dryers, but that will be an additional part number to get it so it has the longer stubs on it so that you can use the RLS fittings. It's going to go back to have straps on it. Just like we used to have a number of years ago, it's going to back to where we're going to have strapping on it. Excuse me. All right, we're also going to have, as far as the labeling, if you look at the bottom there, we're going to have color-coded labeling. So instead of it just saying blue or something, it will actually have the color. So the Y is a yellow with a black stripe. My Y2 is yellow with a red stripe. So it's going to simplify what we're dealing with as far as the colors of the wires are going to be listed. So that will hopefully help out with um, being able to simplify the wiring as far on it. Also, our wiring diagram is going to be a little bit larger. So it should be easier to read the wiring diagrams on the units themselves. So instead of having to get out your magnifying glass or like me, take my glasses or put glasses on to see it, they're going to be a little bit larger, so easier to see. Also coming with it is going to be this bag on the side, which is going to have our installation instructions and all our literature that comes with it, along with 4 zip ties that you can use for whatever you want to use for to neaten the job up. Those will automatically come with it. The other nice thing about this is this bag has an adhesive strip. So we can take that bag and we can put it on the side of the furnace or on the side of the ductwork or something, so the bag and the literature can stay with the equipment. So we don't have to worry about it getting lost and, or thrown in or hopefully taken out of the furnace. So this is going to help us to make sure the literature is there with it. So it's going to be nice to have it a place that we can actually have it so it's there. Okay, so once again, this is a little hard to read, but this is the physical data on it. And what I kind of wanted to bring up is make sure that we look at our electrical qualifications on the equipment, because a few of these are different than what we're dealing with on our current units. So our minimum overcurrent device, that is basically deals with our wire size. So make sure that we look at that. The wire size on some of them have gone down, but we got to make sure you double check that. The other thing you're going to look at is right above that is the maximum overcurrent protection, which is our breakers. Make sure, once again, some of them are the same, but not all of them. Some of them have changed to a different breaker size. Generally, the larger sizes are going to be a little bit bigger. And then down at the bottom down here, I have your unit charge, so how much refrigerant comes in the unit, along with our adder for our line set. So for the smaller units, our 1.5 tons, 2.5 tons, and 3 tons, our adder is going to be 0.57 ounces per foot. Where before it was 0.62, or most people just use 0.6. So it's still going to be relatively 0.6, but if we're going along the line set, this is going to come into play. We do not want to overcharge these because they are still going to be microchannel. So we want to make sure we're putting in the right amount of refrigerant so that we're not overcharging it to the point of where when it gets hot or the coils get dirty or that they forget to change their furnace filter, that we're not going back out and have to take a couple ounces out. So be aware of it is just a little bit less, not much, but just a little bit less. When we get up to the 3.5 and 4, we're back up to our 0.6. And then at the 5 ton, we're back up to our 0.67. So once again, not a huge difference than what we're dealing with, but we need to be made aware of that fact that it is just a little bit different. So here's our coils, upflow, downflow, and our multi-position. As you can see on the sides over here, that the RDS sensor is already pre-mounted in the position that it needs to be. So once again, it does not need to be moved. We just need to make sure that we do use that and that is wired up along with our control, wired up properly so that we meet all of our qualifications for our leak possibility. Like I said, it's not going to be a huge deal, but this is a requirement. This is what we're going to use. This is what's going to have to be installed. It's not going to be a huge difference, but it is going to add a couple minutes, not a lot, but it is something that you have to make sure you do put this in so you meet the qualifications for this. And I've had somebody bring up, well, who's going to enforce this? Well, so who is going to enforce it? Well, it's going to come down to a few things. Is inspectors are going to be looking for this. Make sure that these are properly installed. If another contractor sees it, that's when it may come into play too. Or the third big one is insurance companies. So say you decide not to bother to hook this up, and not that it's going to be the equipment's fault, but if something happens and there's a fire and the insurance company does not want to pay out any money if they don't have to. And if they find out that, this sprung a leak and it didn't start the fire, but it could have accelerated the fire, and the sensor was not hooked up, guess who's going to be paying some money? So it's self-policing. Just do it. It doesn't take much time to do it. It's not a big thing. It comes with the equipment. Just make sure you install it and install it properly. So this is some of the equipment, all of this equipment, field piece equipment, we have these, and they are all A2L compatible, from the recovery machine to the vacuum pump to the gauges, to the wireless kits. We have all this stuff, and it is all A2L compatible. So if you're in need of new equipment, please get a hold of your TMs or the counter, and we'll be more than happy to help you out to make sure that you have the right equipment to do your job correctly with the new refrigerants. All right. Any questions on anything we've covered, or actually anything we didn't cover? Oops. Where does the RDS get mounted? It mounts where it is most convenient, but it has to go between the indoor coil and the furnace. So once again, you can mount it on the side of the coil. Just be aware of if your screws are going through, on the side of the furnace, or on a wall, just so that it's someplace within the range, because you're going to get the uh, wiring harness comes with it, does have a limit to it as far as the length. Get back to my RDS. Oops, too far. There we go. So this system wiring harness is fairly long, but you don't want to have to, well, you could splice it, but you generally have enough wire there that you wouldn't have to splice it. And then your thermostat connections, whatever your thermostat wire needs to be. So it just goes in between the system. What you cannot change is the length of the wire that comes with that RDS sensor. You cannot cut that. You cannot splice it. It has to be able to plug in directly without any additional splices or anything here into the control board. So that is going to be the limiting thing, is the board has to be able to plug into that sensor without cutting that wire. If it would happen to go off, it senses the refrigerant. The equipment shuts off, the blower comes on, it disperses the refrigerant, it will reset, and it will allow your equipment to come back on. Now, if it goes off, you're going to have a service call to put refrigerant back in it and find the leak. But if it's a furnace or something like that, if in the wintertime, say it goes off, when it has dispersed that, it will reset itself and allow the furnace to come back on. So it is a non-replaceable sensor, which has an expected life of at least 15 years. Anything else? How will communicating equipment work with the RDS? The newer furnaces that will be coming out, which aren't here yet, but when they come out, if you're using communication, the boards will be different so that your RDS sensor will plug directly into that control board. You won't use the board on communicating equipment because it will be a different signal that will send directly to the board. So when the communicating stuff comes out, it will be a little bit different. You'll still have the RDS sensor. You won't have to use that control board because it will plug directly into the new furnace control board at that time. I've also made it, if you want to unmute yourself, you're more than welcome. If you want to, any comments or anything, you can unmute yourself too. Anything?
Hey, Steve, there's a question in there about the RDS used with the zone system.
Then I want to thank you for your time this morning. You're done a little bit early, so you can go get to work a little early. And if you have any questions at any time, just give us a call. Don and I and Eric are all available to help answer with your questions. So if not, I appreciate your time and thank you. Have a good weekend.